My name is Alex Parker. I'm 28 years old, and last month, I did something I never thought I'd pull off. I bought my first home all on my own. No cosigner, no inheritance, no help. Just me, a mountain of student loans, and 10 years of pure, relentless sacrifice. But then, 3 weeks later, I opened my mailbox and found court papers. My parents, yes, my own parents, were suing me for buying the house. Before I can continue my story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. From the outside, my family looked like the American dream: neat lawn, family dinners, summer vacations, the whole picture. But behind the curated photos and polite smiles was a house ruled by quiet control. My parents, Linda and David Parker, didn't yell, didn't hit. They calculated, especially when it came to money. From the age of 10, I had to submit spreadsheets to explain how I spent my allowance. "You spent $7 at Target." What for my mom would ask, her reading glasses sliding down her nose like a judge about to pass sentence. It was normal to me. It was all I knew, until it wasn't. I never questioned it. At least not back then. I thought it was normal. It wasn't until high school that I started to feel the weight of their control. When I got my first job at 16, I was thrilled. But instead of being able to keep the money I earned, my parents insisted I open a joint account with them where they could keep an eye on everything. If I spent money on anything they didn't approve of, I was grilled about it. "What's this $7 charge for at the mall?" my mother would ask, her voice sharp. "Hair clips," I'd answer, feeling the weight of her gaze. "Do you really need more hair clips? You have 20 already." It felt suffocating, but I went along with it because I didn't know any other way. But as I started to get older, something inside me began to stir. I didn't want to live like that forever. I had dreams, and they didn't involve endless financial micromanagement or living according to someone else's rules. The deeper I got into my teenage years, the more I began to resent the control. My parents, Linda and David, always made it clear that family came first, but their version of family meant we all had to contribute to a collective pot, something that seemed more like a financial leash than a safety net. I wasn't allowed to leave home for college unless I adhered to their plan, which included me going to a local community college to save money for the family. Why pay for an expensive out-of-state school when you can contribute to the family fund? Instead, my mom had said, her voice thick with that familiar undertone of authority, I didn't even know what the family fund was for. My parents were vague about it. It was this catch-all excuse for why we were all supposed to contribute, no matter our personal dreams or financial futures. Every time I questioned them about it, they would make me feel like I was being ungrateful. When I applied to out-of-state schools, my mom opened my mail. All the scholarship offers, financial aid information, and acceptance letters went straight into a drawer in their office. When I confronted her about it, her face hardened. "You don't need that. We're providing for you," she said dismissively. I didn't understand it at first. She made it sound like a logical plan, that it was for the good of the whole family. But when I realized she was making decisions for me that affected my future decisions I didn't agree with, I began to feel like I was suffocating. I was an adult now, or at least I should be. Why was I still tied to this invisible string they had attached to me? One evening, after months of silently boiling with frustration, I decided I was done. I applied to a university 3 states away. It was a bold move, terrifying even, but I couldn't let my parents control me any longer. I got in, and the acceptance letter came in the mail just a few days before I left. It felt like I had made a massive leap toward freedom, but it came with consequences. The day I told my parents I was leaving, my father's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "You're throwing away everything we've built for this family," he spat. "If you leave, don't expect our support." My brother Chris was standing in the hallway, looking like he'd just seen a ghost. He didn't speak, but his disapproval was written all over his face. As I packed my bags that night, I thought about what my mom had said, how she tried to make it seem like leaving was a betrayal. But it wasn't a betrayal, it was self-preservation. And I had no idea how much that moment would change my life. The next morning, I left. 2 suitcases, no more than a couple $100, and the barest idea of what life would look like outside the suffocating grip of my parents. I was on my own for the first time in my life. College was supposed to be my fresh start, but the financial burden that came with it almost crushed me. I had scholarships, yes, but they barely covered half of my tuition, so I worked nonstop. I was juggling 3 jobs. I was a waitress, I worked retail on weekends, and I also did some freelance writing on the side. At night, I'd lay in my tiny dorm room, counting the hours until I could start the next shift. There was no time for sleep, no time for socializing. I didn't go home for the holidays, not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't afford it. Even the smallest luxuries like a movie ticket or a night out with friends seemed like an extravagance I couldn't justify. At times, I felt like I was barely holding it together. The weight of it, all the constant pressure to work the unrelenting bills, and the isolation from my family felt suffocating. Yet despite the exhaustion, there was something deeply empowering about it. I was finally in control of my life. No one was telling me how to spend my money, no one was watching over my every decision. I had nothing but my determination to drive me forward. But my parents didn't see it that way. They sent me letters, often passive-aggressive, accusing me of being selfish. They would tell me that I was wasting my potential, that I could have had it all if I had just stayed home. My mom even hinted that they were disappointed I had turned my back on the family fund, implying that I owed them for everything they had sacrificed to raise me. But I was done playing by their rules. I was an adult, and I didn't need their permission to succeed. The breaking point came after a phone call from Chris. I had been ignoring calls from home for weeks, not wanting to deal with the guilt trips. But he left a voicemail that stuck with me. Mom and Dad don't understand why you're throwing everything away. You've always been the stubborn one, but now you've really crossed the line. They're hurt, you know. That was the moment I realized that no matter how much I tried to prove myself, no matter how hard I worked, I was never going to meet their expectations. The more I fought for independence, the more they tried to pull me back into their web of control. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about power. And no matter how far I ran, they always seemed to find a way to drag me back into their world. But I couldn't go back. I wouldn't. The next time they reached out to me, I blocked their numbers. I needed to protect myself from their constant guilt and manipulation. It felt like severing the last tie to a version of myself I had been trying to escape. After college, I started my first full-time job at a marketing firm in Philadelphia. The starting salary wasn't much $13,200 a year, but it was a start. It felt like an uphill battle from day one. My student loans weighed heavy on my shoulders, and the pressure of living in a new city with barely enough money to pay for rent was overwhelming. But I was determined to make it. There was no turning back now. I wasn't going to crawl back to my parents and beg for help. I moved into a rundown house with 3 roommates. The space was cramped and the bathroom was always dirty, but it was affordable. I learned to live on the bare minimum, stretching every dollar. My rent was only $400 a month, and I budgeted religiously. My meals were mostly oatmeal for breakfast, peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, and rice and beans for dinner. On the rare occasion I splurged, it was for a $10 takeout meal, something I could barely justify, but couldn't resist after working 2 part-time jobs on top of my full-time one. Weekends weren't for rest either. I spent them working extra shifts in retail or at a coffee shop doing anything I could to bring in a few more dollars. When my friends invited me to parties or dinners, I made up excuses. I've got a deadline, I'd say, or I'm working a double shift that night. The truth was, I couldn't afford to go out. I couldn't justify spending money on things that didn't directly contribute to my future. The sacrifice wasn't just financial, it was emotional. I missed out on so many experiences. I couldn't afford to be spontaneous. Even if I wanted to go see a movie or hang out with friends, I would talk myself out of it. I'm saving for something bigger, I'd remind myself. But the isolation started to take its toll. My friends from college drifted away, unable to understand why I wouldn't join them for dinner or travel with them for weekend trips. My social circle shrank to a few close friends who didn't mind if our hangouts were just sitting at home watching movies and splitting a $5 pizza. It wasn't until the 3rd year that things started to shift. I got a promotion at work, raising my salary to $42,000. I moved into a slightly better apartment for $750 a month, but I didn't loosen my grip on my finances. I kept saving even though it was tempting to upgrade my lifestyle. I watched as my friends bought new clothes cars and took vacations abroad, but I stayed focused. I didn't want any distractions. I didn't want to stray from my goal. There were nights when I would sit on the floor of my tiny apartment, looking at my bank account balance, and wonder if it was all worth it. Would the sacrifice ever pay off? Would I ever have the life I dreamed of, without all the years of grueling work and loneliness? But every time I felt the weight of exhaustion, I reminded myself that this was the price of freedom. One day, I would own something of my own, something no one could take away from me. By year 5, I had saved $100,000. It wasn't the $350,000 I eventually needed, but it was progress. I was closing in on my goal. Each milestone felt like a small victory, but I never allowed myself to get too comfortable. I stayed disciplined, focused, and resolute. I knew that in the end, the house would be mine. My dream home, the symbol of everything I had worked for, all the years of sacrifice. It felt like a lifetime of saving and struggling, but after almost a decade of sacrifice, I finally reached my goal. The day I hit $350,000 in savings was a moment of pure relief, followed closely by a burst of excitement. I could hardly believe it. The money was in my account, just waiting to be used for something real. Something that I had worked so hard for. I spent the next few weeks researching neighborhoods in Philadelphia, browsing listings, and meeting with realtors. I wasn't looking for anything extravagant. I just wanted something solid, a house I could call my own, without worrying about repairs or hidden costs. I didn't need luxury, I needed stability. The house had to have good bones, be in a neighborhood that was up and coming, but still affordable, and of course it had to be within my budget. One Saturday, after visiting what felt like 100 properties, I saw it. A modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet area that was just starting to grow. The backyard was small, and the kitchen needed some work, but the structure was sound. The roof was only 5 years old, and the furnace had been recently replaced. It was perfect. It wasn't my dream house, but it was my house. I felt a surge of emotion, like I had finally made it to the finish line after so many years of struggle. The asking price was $290,000, right at the top of my budget. But it felt right. After walking through it a second time with the realtor, I knew I had to make an offer. I'd seen enough houses that didn't meet my needs to know this one was the one. We submitted an offer for $275,000 that evening, and within 24 hours the seller countered with $285,000. After a brief back and forth, we settled at $282,000. The mortgage process was smooth, my excellent credit score and large down payment working in my favor. I opted for a 15-year fixed-rate mortgage instead of the usual 30-year. I knew it would save me a significant amount in the long run, even if it meant stretching my budget in the short term. Closing day was surreal. I was sitting at a table with strangers signing a mountain of paperwork that felt like it would never end. And then the moment arrived. The seller's agent handed me the keys, and I felt a wave of relief and accomplishment wash over me. The house was officially mine. I wanted to shout, to jump up and down, but instead, I just sat there holding the keys, letting the reality of it sink in. This was my home. No more roommates, no more sacrificing everything for a dream. I had made it. I had built this life from the ground up, and no one could take it away from me. That evening, I stood in the empty house, running my hand over the cold hardwood floors. I was already planning the small renovations I wanted to do, the paint colors I would choose, and the furniture I would eventually buy. I didn't have much, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that this house, this space was mine. I had fought for it, sacrificed for it, and now it was finally real. I allowed myself one night to celebrate ordering a bottle of champagne. Not the expensive kind, but something I could afford. I sat on the floor of my new home, sipping from a plastic cup, thinking about everything it had taken to get here. Every dollar saved, every social invitation, I turned down, every ounce of sweat put into my jobs. It had all led to this. And for the first time in a decade, I allowed myself to feel proud of what I had achieved. Just 3 weeks after I moved into my new house, the storm hit. I was still in the process of unpacking, arranging my books on the shelves, when I found the envelope in my mailbox. It was from my parents' lawyer. I thought it was a mistake at first, but as soon as I opened it, the reality hit me like a punch to the gut. My parents were suing me for buying my own house. I sat on the floor of my new living room, the legal papers trembling in my hands. I stared at them for what felt like an eternity. How could they do this after everything I'd been through, after all the years of sacrifice and hard work? How could they take something this personal from me? They claimed that I owed them $100,000 for not contributing to the family fund. According to them, my ability to save money for the down payment was directly tied to the financial discipline they had instilled in me. I had always been the good child, the responsible one, and they believed that this sacrifice had created some unspoken agreement that I owed them for my independence. I hadn't heard from my parents in over 3 years, ever since I left for college and cut ties with them. After I blocked their numbers and stopped responding to their attempts at communication, I thought I had finally broken free from their control. But this was the final betrayal. It felt like they were trying to take away the one thing I had worked so hard to build for myself. I spent the next few days in a daze. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the times my parents had tried to push their values on me, all the times they had told me what I was supposed to do. And now they wanted to control my success, to take my hard-earned property from me, as if it had never been mine to begin with. It was like they were trying to erase everything I had done to escape them. The emotional toll was heavy, but I knew I couldn't back down. I needed to fight for this. This was more than just a house. It was the symbol of my independence, my victory. I wasn't going to let them take that from me. I reached out to a family law attorney, desperate for guidance. Michael Rivera was a no-nonsense lawyer who specialized in cases just like mine. When I told him my story, he was silent for a moment before speaking. "This is unusual," he said, looking over the lawsuit documents in his cluttered office. "But that doesn't mean they have a leg to stand on. Your parents are claiming a constructive trust. Essentially, they're arguing that your financial success is somehow owed to them because of their guidance. But that's not what this is," I said, frustrated. "I worked for this. I paid my own way. They didn't help me with my tuition. They didn't give me anything after I left home." Michael nodded. "I get it. But we'll need to prove it. We'll need evidence of how you've been completely independent since the day you left for college. We'll need everything, your bank statements, your tax returns, testimony from friends and employers, anything we can use to show the court that this was all earned by you and only you." And that's when it hit me. They were coming for my freedom, for my right to exist without their influence. They were trying to rewrite the story of my life, but I wasn't going to let them. So I started gathering everything I could. Financial records, pay stubs letters from roommates, old emails to my parents. I even contacted my college's financial aid office, asking them to verify that I had never received a penny from my parents after I left for school. I was determined to show that this wasn't just some reckless decision I made on a whim. This was the result of years of sacrifice and hard work. The days dragged by, and I could feel the pressure building. But I kept pushing forward. I had no choice. This was my fight, and I wasn't going to let anyone take what I had built. The day of the first hearing arrived faster than I expected. The courthouse was cold and sterile, the kind of place that made you feel like you were trapped in a maze with no escape. I sat in the waiting room, my palms sweating as I clutched the file of evidence Michael had helped me prepare. The papers felt like bricks in my hands. They were my armor now, proof of my hard work, proof of my independence, and proof that my parents had no claim over my success. I wasn't sure what I expected, but when the courtroom door opened and I saw my parents sitting at one of the tables, something inside me snapped. They looked so calm, so composed, like they were just here to attend a boring family meeting, not to destroy me. My mother's face was a mask of concern, the kind she used when she wanted people to believe she was the victim. My father was sitting with his arms crossed, looking like a man who knew he was in control. And there was Chris sitting between them, his face unreadable. For a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes, but it was gone so quickly that I questioned whether I had imagined it. He wasn't there to support me. I knew that. He was part of the family system that had kept me chained for so long. As we all settled into our seats, I could feel the weight of the room press down on me. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on the edge of her nose, called the session to order. My parents' attorney, Mr. Wilson, stood first, his suit sharp and polished, like he had just stepped out of a law office ad. He made his opening statement with an air of authority, his voice smooth and confident. Your Honor, the Parker family has always believed in the importance of shared responsibility. Alex was raised with the same values that we instilled in her brother Chris. She has been given every opportunity, but instead of contributing to the family's future, she chose to leave us behind. Now she has benefited from the financial education and discipline we provided her. And yet she has refused to contribute to the family fund, which is meant to ensure the well-being of all family members. He turned to me with a cold, almost pitying look. This is a betrayal of the family's values and a violation of the agreements we have had in place for years. My heart sank. I had heard it before, the guilt, the manipulation, the same old arguments. They were trying to paint me as the villain, the ungrateful child, who had turned her back on everything they had done for me. I wasn't sure how I would respond, but I knew I had to stay strong. I couldn't let them control the narrative anymore. When it was my turn, Michael stood beside me, guiding me through the process. His calm, steady voice was a contrast to the chaos swirling inside my chest. I looked at the judge, trying to steady my nerves. She was older but sharp. Her gaze never wavered as I spoke. Your Honor, I began, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. I understand what my parents are saying, but it's simply not true. Yes, they provided for me when I was younger, but after I left for college, I was completely on my own. I didn't receive a single penny from them after that. I worked 3 jobs to pay for my education. I moved into a tiny shared apartment, cutting out every luxury to save money. I earned every dollar I saved, every penny that allowed me to buy this home. I paused, trying to find the right words. This isn't just about a house. This is about my life, my future. I made a decision to leave home to create a life for myself, and I did it without their help. What I did alone. And it wasn't easy, but it was mine. I could feel the eyes of the courtroom on me. The judge seemed to be weighing my words carefully, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt heard. Michael then presented the evidence we had gathered: bank statements, tax returns, letters from my roommates and bosses, who could verify my frugality and work ethic. It wasn't a story of reckless spending or financial neglect. It was a story of hard work, sacrifice, and determination. Then it was their turn. My mother took the stand, her voice trembling as she began her testimony. She spoke of how they had sacrificed so much for me, how they had given me everything. She spoke of the family fund, about how my refusal to contribute had shattered their expectations. But as I listened to her, I realized something. This wasn't about money at all. This was about control. My parents wanted me to feel guilty for wanting my independence. They wanted me to feel indebted to them for the life they had given me, even if that life had come with strings attached. Michael asked her a simple question that changed everything. Mrs. Parker, you claim Alex benefited from your financial discipline. Can you provide any documentation or proof that she agreed to contribute to this family fund? Her face flushed. She stammered. Well, no, we didn't sign anything. But it's understood. It's the way our family has always operated. I could see the cracks in her story now. This wasn't a legal obligation. This was an emotional manipulation wrapped up in a false sense of responsibility. The rest of the day blurred by, and when it was all over, the judge scheduled a full hearing for next month. I left the courtroom feeling like I had won a small victory, but I knew the real fight wasn't over. The family's hold on me wasn't going to let go so easily. The weeks after the first hearing were a blur of stress and anxiety. Every day felt like a race against time. I barely slept. I lost weight. My stomach was constantly in knots, and every morning I woke up with a sense of dread that seemed to follow me throughout the day. The lawsuit had already drained me emotionally, but it was the constant mental gymnastics that really wore me down, reliving every conversation, every argument with my parents, trying to figure out where I went wrong, what I could have done differently. I questioned myself more than I ever had before. Was I being unreasonable? Should I have just gone along with their plans? But deep down, I knew the answer. I couldn't. Not anymore. I had fought too hard for my independence to let it slip away now. I didn't let anyone see how much I was struggling. On the outside, I kept up my work routine. At the office, I smiled and laughed at the right moments, but inside I was crumbling. I couldn't focus at work. I couldn't focus on anything. My thoughts kept drifting back to the court case, to my parents, to Chris. The emotional toll was heavier than I could have anticipated. It was affecting my relationships with the people who were closest to me. Megan, my best friend, was the one person who could see through the facade. She had been there for me throughout this entire mess, offering her support when I was tempted to give up. But even she couldn't stop me from spiraling. One evening, as I sat on the couch in my new living room, she asked the question I had been avoiding. "How are you really doing, Alex?" Megan asked, her voice gentle but firm. I stared at the wall for a moment, unable to answer. I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to admit that after all the hard work, all the years of sacrifice, I was still struggling to feel like it had been worth it. I didn't want to admit that the emotional burden of fighting my family had started to feel like a weight I couldn't carry alone. "I'm tired," I said finally, my voice sounding like a confession. Megan sat down beside me, her presence grounding. "I get it. This whole thing is a nightmare. But don't forget you're doing this for you, not for them. And you're stronger than they realize." Her words helped, but only a little. I needed more than just encouragement. I needed answers. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I lost this case, if my parents were able to make me feel guilty enough to give in, it would undo everything I had worked for. It would prove that I was still trapped, that their influence over me was unbreakable. The idea of losing my home, the one place I had made entirely my own, was too much to bear. It was all I had left. To cope, I threw myself deeper into the case, trying to ignore the toll it was taking on me emotionally. I spent every spare moment combing through financial documents, meeting with Michael, preparing for the next phase of the hearing. But the deeper I got into the legal fight, the more I realized how much of my energy was being drained. The case was consuming me, and I hated it. One night after another exhausting day of legal preparation, I broke. I hadn't realized how much I was carrying until I finally let myself feel it. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the dimly lit countertop, the weight of everything finally sinking in. Tears came without warning, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel the pain, the fear, and the sadness that had been building up inside of me for so long. I knew this wasn't just about the house anymore. It wasn't even about the money. It was about my fight for my own sense of self-worth, my autonomy, and my right to make decisions that didn't revolve around the expectations of others. When the tears finally stopped, I wiped my face and took a deep breath. I had to be stronger than this. I couldn't keep letting them break me down. I had to hold on to what I had built, no matter what it took. The fight wasn't over. But this time, I wasn't just fighting for my house. I was fighting for myself. The day of the full hearing came, and by then, I was prepared for the worst. The emotional exhaustion had settled in like a weight on my chest, and I had learned to keep my face neutral, my thoughts focused solely on the task ahead. Michael had assured me that our case was strong, but a part of me still feared that my parents' emotional manipulation would win out. Every time I stepped into that courthouse, the tension in my stomach grew tighter, the sound of my own heartbeat louder. When we entered the courtroom, it was packed. My parents had brought a small army of family friends, and even a few neighbors, all of whom had known me growing up. They sat there dressed in their Sunday best, trying to look like a family who had been wronged. The scene felt so foreign to me. It was like watching a play where I wasn't sure who I was supposed to be. My mother was sitting rigidly, clutching a stack of papers in her hands, looking like the perfect picture of a mother desperate for her child's love and respect. But underneath the surface, I knew this was more about control than care. She kept glancing at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of disappointment and rage, as if I had betrayed her by daring to make my own choices. On the opposite side, my lawyer Michael was a calming presence. He whispered reassurances as I sat down, his confident demeanor grounding me. "Remember, you're fighting for your future, Alex. You're not the one who's in the wrong here. Stay focused." The proceedings started, and it felt like every word spoken was another jab at my sense of security. My parents' attorney, Mr. Wilson, made his case with that same cold precision he had used during the first hearing. He recounted the family fund, the sacrifices they had made, and the unspoken expectation that I should contribute. He painted me as the prodigal child who had received everything and yet refused to pay back the family's kindness. When it was my turn, I took a deep breath and stood trying to keep my voice steady. Michael stood beside me, nodding in support. The truth was, it felt strange to speak in front of so many people, knowing that I was about to unveil all the ways my parents had controlled me. But this was my truth, and I was done hiding it. "Your Honor," I began, my voice trembling slightly at first. "I understand that my parents have a different view of what family means, but I didn't ask for the family fund. I didn't ask for any of the emotional or financial control they imposed on me. Since I left for college, I've worked relentlessly to make a life for myself. I've never received a dime from them, and I've built everything I have through hard work, sacrifice, and independence." I paused, looking at my parents across the room. I've always loved them, but love shouldn't come with strings attached. I didn't leave my family because I didn't care. I left because I needed to be free, and I've fought for that freedom every single day since. I could see my mother's face contorting with emotion. She was crying now, wiping at her eyes with a tissue. But her tears weren't the ones of a parent who had been wronged. They were the tears of someone who realized that their grip on me was slipping. I could almost hear the argument in her head. How could I do this to her? How could I betray everything she had planned for me? Michael stepped in, questioning my parents about their refusal to provide any real support during my college years, about the fact that they had made no effort to financially help me once I left. Every answer they gave only dug their hole deeper. There was no formal agreement, no contract binding me to this so-called family fund. It was just an idea, a manipulation dressed up as responsibility. When it came time for the judge's ruling, I had no idea what to expect. My parents' attorney had made his case, and I had made mine. It was out of my hands. But when the judge spoke, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. After reviewing the evidence presented, Judge Peterson began, "I find that the plaintiff's claims do not hold. There is no formal agreement between Alex and her parents regarding any obligation to contribute to a family fund. The money she saved was her own earned through her own efforts. This court finds that the defendant, Alex, acted within her legal rights." The words rang out in my head, but it wasn't until the judge finished speaking that I realized I had won. The case was dismissed. The legal battle was over. But the victory wasn't as sweet as I thought it would be. I looked over at my parents. My mother was crying, her face crumpled in anguish, while my father sat stoically beside her, his expression unreadable. Chris was staring at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of disappointment and anger. They hadn't won, but in many ways, it felt like I had lost something even more precious, the possibility of a family that would ever truly understand me. As the courtroom emptied, I stood there numb. Michael gave me a small nod, a silent congratulation. But all I could think about was the cost of this victory. I had kept my home, but at what price? I wasn't sure yet. But I knew one thing: I was done trying to please them. I was done sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of their expectations. The weeks that followed the court ruling felt like an emotional fog. While the legal battle was over, the emotional fallout from it still lingered. I had won the house, but it wasn't the victory I had imagined. There was no sense of celebration, no feeling of triumph, only a deep emptiness that I couldn't shake. My family, the people I had hoped would see the truth, and maybe even come around, were still gone. The rupture between us was permanent. I focused on the one thing I could control: my home. It became more than just a place to live, it became a symbol of everything I had fought for. Every coat of paint, every piece of furniture I carefully picked out was a small rebellion against everything I had been taught about family. I spent weekends painting the walls, sanding the floors, and taking my time to turn this house into a home. It wasn't just a physical transformation. It was a mental one, too. The act of making this space mine, of shaping it into something that reflected who I was becoming, was healing in ways I hadn't expected. But even with all the work I was putting into the house, there were still days when the weight of everything, the years of isolation, the constant legal battle, the strained relationships with my family, felt unbearable. I found myself missing the idea of family, even though I knew they weren't the ones who had been there for me. It wasn't their support I was grieving. It was the dream of what family could have been. Megan had been my rock throughout the whole ordeal, and now she was helping me build new traditions in my new home. We started a weekly dinner club where she and a few of my other close friends would bring food over, and we'd eat and laugh until late into the night. Slowly but surely, my circle of support grew. These friends weren't just people who showed up, they were the people who chose me, who understood what it meant to fight for your happiness. One evening, while we were all sitting around my kitchen table, I realized something important. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly building my own family. It wasn't the family I had been born into, it was a family of my own choosing. These people loved me, without trying to control me, without expecting anything from me other than my presence. I was no longer the child who had to prove my worth to others. I was the adult who had finally found a place where I belonged. Months passed, and the house started to feel like home in a way I hadn't expected. The backyard I'd once dreaded turning into a garden was now filled with plants and flowers I'd planted myself. The once bare walls were covered with paintings and photos that made the space feel vibrant, alive and mine. But the emotional healing wasn't linear. There were still nights when I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what my parents were thinking. Would they ever come around? Would Chris ever reach out to me? Or would I forever be the one who had broken the family apart? Those thoughts came and went. But as time went on, I realized that I didn't need their approval to move forward. One day, nearly a year after the court case, I received a message from Chris. My heart skipped when I saw his name on my phone. He asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, but when we sat across from each other at a small cafe, it was awkward. He looked different, more tired, more resigned. His eyes didn't have the same judgmental look they once did, but they weren't filled with understanding either. "I'm not saying Mom and Dad were right," he began, stirring his coffee, "but I don't think you fully understood how much your leaving hurt them. They felt abandoned." I could feel the old frustration building up, but I tried to stay calm. "Chris, it wasn't about abandoning them. It was about saving myself. They were suffocating me and I couldn't breathe." He nodded slowly. "I get that now. I've been trying to understand things from your perspective, but I don't think I ever fully will. All I can say is, I'm sorry. I wish it hadn't gone down the way it did." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything hanging between us. But it was a start. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was progress. That day, when I left the cafe, I felt a strange sense of peace. My family wasn't going to magically heal, and there was no going back to the way things were. But I had built something stronger, something real. I had built my own life, one that wasn't defined by my parents' expectations or their control. And for the first time in a long time, I was able to fully embrace the idea that home wasn't just a place. It was a feeling, a boundary, a decision. It was the people who chose you back. It was the silence that no longer screamed. It was mine. As I walked back to my house, I smiled, feeling the quiet warmth of my space wrapping around me, like a soft quilt after a hard storm. The fight was long, the cost was real, but I had won something bigger than just a house. I had won my freedom, and I had finally come home to myself. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are the ones where no one cheers for us. But those wins, they change everything. Have you ever had to stand up to family pressure or walk away from expectations just to protect your peace? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. If this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to break cycles, even if it means standing alone for a while. The path to freedom is rarely easy, but it's always worth it. Thank you for listening. Be kind to yourself. Rest well.